The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We do have a bunch of primary elections today, but last night, on the eve of several of the last primaries, the Associated Press called the Democratic nomination for Hillary Clinton. Many Bernie supporters saying this was a tactic to suppress voter turnout today. We will talk about that. The Associated Press saying, well, listen, if you look at the pledged delegates that Hillary Clinton has already earned, and you combine that with what we now estimate to be the superdelegate support that she has surpassed the required 2,383 combined delegates. In fact, 2,384, the total number estimated by the Associated Press. The New York Times quickly jumped on it, also saying that, hey, the Associated Press has declared Hillary Clinton the presumptive nominee by reaching out to superdelegates who had not announced which candidate they would be supporting, and confirming that enough were backing Hillary Clinton to get her to that magic number of 2,383. So what do we think about this? I mean, on the one hand, superdelegates have not voted. So to call this clinching the nomination would be wrong, but that is not the language that the Associated Press used, at least in their sort of explanation article that they published after. On the other hand, the numbers don't look good for Bernie Sanders, obviously, but the question of timing has been brought up, and motive right before multiple primaries, which, while very unlikely to change the eventual outcome of this race, could, Lewis, make people say, oh, I heard yesterday that Hillary won, so I'm not going to vote today. That is a legitimate concern, although whether it could really change the eventual impact of this, less certain about that.
And in that way, this is really irresponsible. I guess we come to expect that from corporate media and the like. But it's pretty juicy stuff, and I understand why they did it.
Well, the key thing is that nothing official happened, right? Yesterday, enough people who don't vote until July told the Associated Press that they would be supporting Hillary Clinton, and the AP published a sort of explanation article afterwards. Here's a quote from that article from the AP explaining this. Clinton is now the presumptive nominee because according to our count, she has enough delegates backing her candidacy to win the nomination. AP will not call her the nominee, or as Newt Gingrich used to say, the nominee, until she reaches that milestone in Philadelphia next month, when the party's delegates formally cast their vote at the convention. The Sanders campaign almost immediately putting out a statement about this, which I will also show you, saying it is unfortunate that the media, in a rush to judgment, are ignoring the Democratic National Committee's clear statement that it is wrong to count the votes of superdelegates before they actually vote at the convention this summer. Secretary Clinton does not have and will not have the requisite number of pledged delegates to secure the nomination. She will be dependent on superdelegates who do not vote until July 25 and who can change their minds between now and then. They include more than 400 superdelegates who endorsed Secretary Clinton 10 months before the first caucuses and primaries and long before any other candidate was in the race. Hillary Clinton campaign also commenting, tweeting. They also are not ready to call this, saying, we're flattered, AP, but we've got primaries to win. California, Montana, New Mexico, North Dakota, New Jersey, South Dakota, vote tomorrow. It's interesting that when even the declared winner is saying it's too soon to declare themselves a winner, but I think this is political posturing, Lewis. She also doesn't want to dissuade people from voting.
Yeah, and this is the appropriate response. This is what you have to say. You aren't going to accept the nomination bestowed upon you by the Associated Press.
Right.
So, yeah, okay.
However, the interesting element that is now being added to this as we get ready, as people are already voting across the U.S. today in a variety of states, a White House source has said to CNN that President Obama is eager to get going in campaigning for Hillary Clinton. So we may see an endorsement from President Obama sooner than later. And some Bernie Sanders fans are angry about the possibility of an endorsement from President Obama before Bernie Sanders even formally exits the race. But I want to remind you that in 2008, Bernie Sanders endorsed President Obama before Hillary Clinton formally exited the race, coming 2 days after President Obama, sort of on paper, secured what appeared to be the required number of delegates and superdelegates. So I think that criticism would be hypocritical unless you were also critical of Bernie Sanders back in 2008. Of course, many Sanders supporters quite young in 2008.
That is true. I don't think a president should, a former president, fine. I don't think a president who's in office should endorse a candidate.
Well, hold on a second. At any point or before they are the official nominee? I mean, it's traditional.
At any point. Just stay out of it.
Really? I mean, Lewis, it's traditional that the president...
I don't give a you-know-what about tradition.
You just say the sitting president should not be involved at all in the election that will determine their replacement.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying.
And on what basis?
And I also believe that there should be one term served. It can be longer if you'd like. I mean, a sitting president should also not be running for re-election.
You say one term and that's it.
That's what I'm talking about.
Well,
Yeah.
Look at what happens in Congress, where you're up for re-election every 2 years. Essentially, 40% of your time in office is spent campaigning.
Oh, believe me, I know. And the similar rule should be applied to Congress.
Interesting. All right, send me your thoughts on this. Term limits, we've discussed term limits before, a number of interesting reasons that to me are relatively compelling to impose term limits at different levels of elected office. So now let's talk about tonight's primaries. In spite of the Associated Press and New York Times calling the Democratic primary for Hillary Clinton, there are elections tonight. So who votes tonight? Let's take a look. We have California, 546 delegates, and New Jersey with 142 delegates available. These are the big prizes tonight, to the extent that any of this even matters at this point. We also have Montana, New Mexico, North Dakota, and South Dakota all together comprising about, a little under 150 additional delegates. And then next Tuesday, June 14th, Washington, D.C. will vote, 45 delegates available there. Lewis, how upsetting must it be to vote in Washington, D.C.? Not only do you not have representation in the Senate if you vote in Washington, D.C., your vote almost never even matters in the primary because it's after everything has been decided. President Obama may have already endorsed Hillary Clinton by the time Washington, D.C. votes next week.
Yeah, you would think they'd be the first to vote, right? Because I would have just assumed that it would have been set up that way from the beginning. Well, yeah, must be frustrating.
So how do the polls look? We don't even have data from every state that is voting tonight. I'll show you what we do have. In California, Hillary Clinton leading Bernie Sanders by 2 percentage points in an average of recent polls as compiled by Real Clear Politics. In New Jersey, Hillary Clinton leading by about 20 percentage points over Bernie Sanders based on an average of recent polls. And in Montana, New Mexico, North and South Dakota, we have no recent enough polling to even tell us what's going on. But the most important thing I can tell you, Lewis, about Montana, New Mexico, North Dakota, and South Dakota, and this is not me saying that those states are bad states. It's not me insulting the people who live in those states, Lewis. All I'm saying is the results will not matter in those states.
Yes, most likely. Although results, depending, might make for a couple good headlines. There might be some interesting data. Ultimately, it will not matter.
You think people will be dissuaded from voting in the states that vote today based on that news yesterday that the Associated Press has determined Hillary Clinton has secured the Democratic nomination?
Well,
to be perfectly honest,
if you're politically active at all, I mean, I think you know that at this point, it just might not make a difference anyway. I mean, yesterday's news might not...
Well,
it can't help.
It's a double-edged sword in the sense that if you are voting in the primary, you probably already knew the mathematical realities of what was going on in the race because primary voters are far more informed and engaged on average than general election voters. On the other hand, not everybody would necessarily be up to speed on the news this morning. The AP announcing this last night, Monday evening. You might not even have heard about it. I don't know.
Yes, maybe not. I mean, you get up, you do your routine, you go right to work. It might not have been in any local papers yet. And so hard to say. But the news probably will dissuade some people from voting.
But it might
I don't-
dissuade as many Hillary supporters as Bernie supporters. They
That's
both
true.
might think
Yeah.
there's no point in going out. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
Send me your thoughts about the AP's declaration that Hillary Clinton has secured the nomination. Send me your thoughts about whether anything could happen in the states that vote today that would put Bernie back on a path to this nomination. I'm on Twitter at dpacman. Lewis is on Twitter at Lewis Motamedy.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
This may come as a shock to you, but our program actually depends on the support of the audience to do what it is that we do. I know it's not a subject that comes up often on the program, Lewis, but I do like to mention it every once in a while. We have this thing called the membership program, and today's new member of the day is Stephen Jacobson, who is just a great, all-around great guy, Lewis. I mean, who we can't possibly say enough about Stephen Jacobson.
Are you sure it's not Steven?
Stefan?
Okay. Yep, you're right. I didn't see the spelling. I was just
It could
making
be
sure.
Stefan.
We just want to have clarity this evening.
Oh, absolutely. No doubt about it. So join Stefan at davidpakman.com/membership, where you can also sample all of the great member benefits. Shocker, Lewis, but that is how the program is funded. Okay, yesterday I mentioned I had these 20 subsidized memberships to give away. And the way it works is a yearly David Pakman Show membership is $60 US as the normal going price. We have this longtime member based in New York City who every once in a while gets in touch and says, hey, I'd love to pay for half of some people's memberships. And he actually got in touch back in late February, but we had other membership promos going on. So we're just now getting to this, Lewis, in June. 20 memberships this longtime supporter has subsidized at the 50% rate. So he has paid $30 for 20 people, and the 20 memberships are now available to you for that half price rate of $30. I mentioned this yesterday. Of the 20, 7 have already been spoken for. I have 13 left. If you are interested in one of these half price memberships, please get in touch. You can go to davidpakman.com and use the contact form and say, I want one of those half-price memberships. Or you can just email me directly, david@davidpakman.com. If we have them available, I will get right back to you with a link where you can sign up at that discounted rate. Big things. I've been holding Lewis off. Lewis has 7.2 million memberships right now, and he is desperate to pick up these 20 additional memberships. And we've been holding you off, Lewis, from acquiring these.
That's true. I did sell 1 million memberships last night to the Chinese government.
I see.
So I'm downsizing a little bit.
I also want to remind you, we are taking live calls during the show, Thursday, 1:15 p.m. Eastern Time. If you want to call in, set a reminder on your phone to go off at 1:15 p.m. Eastern Time. The number is 617-830-4750. Quickly becoming a popular and prominent feature, Lewis, of the end of the week programming. People like the calls, and we like taking them. We just say, hey, who's this? Where are you? And what could we address for you? How can I help you? Is my attitude during these calls. I'm here to help.
It's good. Yeah. And so far, no one has started yelling Baba Booey, or anything like that.
And the thing is, we don't really care. I mean, what's the worst you'll swear on the air? You'll insult me on the air? I mean, Lewis, have you heard of Hatriot Mail?
Yeah, we could actually just bleep all that too.
Sure. Well, but Lewis, that's we don't want. Yeah. Anyway, we'll talk about that off the air. Yeah. Okay. My Instagram account, Lewis, is blowing up after I posted a face swap of my dad and I, but I will get to that in a second. Of course, I'm on Instagram at david.pakman. And if you're on a computer, it's instagram.com/david.pakman. The second most liked picture on my Instagram account last week, I made, Lewis, chicken wings. These, you will be pleased to know. You know what I know what you would first ask about the chicken wings, right? You go ahead and ask it.
Are they fried?
That's exactly the question. The answer, no, they're not. These are oven-baked chicken wings. It is a soy chili oil who knows what else recipe. I couldn't even tell you what this was. Absolutely delicious, Lewis, and very, very popular. People loving it. Surprisingly, almost any time I post any animal product to my Instagram page, you know what group starts posting and directing me and demanding that I do a particular thing with my diet?
I'm guessing vegans.
That's right.
Okay. Yeah.
But somehow this particular post of my amazing chicken wings, no comments about me becoming a vegan.
They looked that good, I guess.
They look that good. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, these things were unbelievable. And the most popular picture on my Instagram account over the last week, it is a face swap I did with my dad and I. And what's fascinating, Lewis, is the scaling is a bit off. The thing with these face swaps is if someone is slightly closer to the camera, their head is bigger. And when the swap happens, something about the scaling of people's faces and heads becomes slightly off. But this is pretty good. And would you say you can see the family resemblance there? I think you definitely can.
Yeah, well, for me, there's two really noteworthy things here. One is that your dad, with the way it worked, the way the picture turned out, you might not even guess that a face has been superimposed over your dad's, right? Because it just looks, that could just be a person, and it doesn't look that weird. But the other thing is that your dad, with your face on his head, looks a lot like your brother, in my opinion.
And Lewis maintains that my brother and I look alike, although it's not a view that's shared by almost anyone else on this planet that knows both of us. You maintain, and you're sticking to that.
Yes. I mean, I haven't said that it's this incredible resemblance and you could be twins. But
sure. No.
There is a resemblance, yeah.
Check it out. Send me your thoughts on this face swap. I am enjoying the face swap thing. I'm on Instagram at david.pacman. I would like Lewis to get on there, but you know, we have a small victory in that he's now willing to be on Twitter, and I think it's good to Lewis has given an inch, and while I would love to take a mile, I don't think we're going to get it, are we?
That is a wise decision. You don't want to push me off of social media altogether.
I have some video and audio to play for you from an interview from the O'Reilly Factor. This is Bill O'Reilly's program on Fox News. And it is being alleged that Donald Trump may be inadvertently revealed that he is being fed the questions for these Bill O'Reilly interviews ahead of time. An issue was brought up by Bill O'Reilly to Donald Trump during this interview where Bill O'Reilly said, listen, there are these reports that the men on your staff are receiving significantly higher salaries than the women. And Donald Trump seemed to respond in a sort of joking way, but not really, that he knew he was going to get this question. And then you can sort of see the look in his eyes that he thinks, you know, I should probably reword that and kind of make a joke about, I had a sense that this might come up. Some people are emailing me saying, David, this is completely unethical. The presentation of questions ahead of time should be disclosed, journalistic ethics, etc. There are others who are saying all this is proof of is that Donald Trump has good handlers who know how to prep him for interviews. Of course, that does not seem to be the trend with Donald Trump. He does not seem to exactly put the best people around him. I'm going to play the video for you. We're going to listen to the audio, and then we'll see what we make of it. The allegation is Donald Trump may have inadvertently revealed that he knew the questions ahead of time before this interview.
Now, on the women front, the Boston Globe yesterday writes that you pay men in your campaign a third more in salary than you pay women. And this goes back to my theme that this is what you're going to be confronted with. Number one, is that true? Do you pay men a third more than women in your campaign?
The answer is no, and I just had to check because I heard this was going to be a question. I don't know, I have a good source, and somebody said that this could be a question. I just checked it, Bill, and the answer is no.
So Trump flips between, I heard this was going to be a question, then he gets a smirk on his face and says, well, we knew this could have been a question, and this is sort of drawing a little bit of a distinction. What do you think on this?
If I had to guess, I'd assume that he got questions ahead of time. I mean, it's Fox News. It's Bill O'Reilly.
O'Reilly has not been hugely critical of Trump.
Isn't this standard operating procedure at Fox when you have on someone who is conservative? I mean,
well, that's what I don't know. I mean, that's what I would like to know. The Society of Professional Journalists says that journalists should be both independent and transparent. If you are providing questions ahead of time, my view is you should present that at the beginning of the interview. Now, you may say, well, David, you've never said at the beginning of an interview that you've presented questions ahead of time. And the reason why is because we refuse to do that. So I have never had to issue that disclosure. We get asked, Lewis, sometimes for the questions ahead of time.
Yeah.
And sometimes it'll go through Lewis and you'll say to me, well, what should I say? And I say no. Obviously, we will tell you the topics. If we're going to have a guest on, it's not going to be a surprise. Are we talking about moon landing conspiracies, or are we talking about quantum entanglements and Deepak Chopra? We have to provide some basis for the interview, but we have never provided questions ahead of time. So indeed, it would not be a huge shocker to me if Trump was given the questions ahead of time. It should be disclosed if that's the case.
I wouldn't ever expect anyone on Fox News to disclose that.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're into journalistic ethics, Fox News is not for you. And I'm sure if you were to investigate enough, you would find all sorts of things to criticize.
Back when Elizabeth Warren was running for Senate in the U.S., and we've told a story where Lewis had to confront a guy who was stalking Elizabeth Warren at our old studio. Her press handler at the time who booked the interview was sort of dancing a sort of fine line, but sort of a blurry area, I guess you would say, in terms of what it is we were going to talk about. And I kept sort of playing it cool and saying, we are going to focus on campaign issues, including the it was like very, very general. And she kept coming back, and I sort of could tell that if I said, here are the questions I'll be asking, she would have absolutely loved it. She didn't require it, though. We did the interview in our studio, and then afterwards she came up to me and she said, those weren't the questions you told me you were going to ask. And I just looked at her completely seriously and said, I didn't give you a list of questions. I gave you a list of topics, and everything I asked was within that purview, period. And, it did not become a big deal.
Yeah, and it's not like you were trying to sandbag her.
No.
I mean, and I have no problem telling a guest, depending on the nature of the interview, yeah, I mean, this is going to be, there aren't going to be any surprises here. I mean, we're not going to catch you off guard with anything. We're talking about, soccer or something like that.
And that's a different thing than saying we are not going to question the things you say. I mean, a good example is when we're having a guest on to talk about a book. We're very comfortable saying the interview is going to focus on the subject matter of the book. You're not going to be surprised about topics outside the book. That's sort of a separate question from whether there is going to be a critical analysis demanded during the interview about that subject matter. This is a common issue in journalism, and I would love to know whether these questions were presented ahead of time. Donald Trump seems to just not realize sometimes that either he is incorrectly giving the impression he got the questions ahead of time, or he is throwing Bill O'Reilly under the bus by admitting that he did.
Hard to say. It does seem he realized he slipped up and shouldn't have said what he said.
Yeah.
For what reason? Maybe we'll never know.
We'll take a break. Give us a like on Facebook, facebook.com/David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to be joined today by Maya Schenwar, who's editor-in-chief of Truthout and author of Locked Down, Locked Out, Why Prison Doesn't Work and How We Can Do Better. Maya, I think I'm going to try to get into this with you maybe in a different way, because we know about the failure of the war on drugs. We know about the disaster that many of the individual sort of logistics of prison have been for many people. We know about the devastating effect that imprisonment has on the communities surrounding and the families of those imprisoned. So let's see if we can work backwards. Is there anything that you feel about the American prison system that is either effective, working well, any silver lining at all?
So I think that when we think about this system and when we evaluate it, as opposed to kind of critiquing its flaws, we have to see it as fundamentally flawed. So for me, this is a system that's not just got problems, but it's not working at its core. So this is a system where we see 2/3 of people coming out of prison being rearrested in 3 years. This is a system that is grounded in white supremacy, that evolved out of slavery, so even its roots are rotten. It's not just that there are rotten apples on the tree. So to me, I don't really see a value in assessing redeeming characteristics in a system that we just have to fundamentally transform. Of course, there are amazing people who work within the system, just as there are amazing people within any system, even those that are fundamentally damaging to society.
What would be the most top level way that one could assess whether a system of incarceration and or rehabilitation, depending on whether you believe that that's the goal, is functioning? Would it be that which you just referred to, which is, are people after serving sentences leading lives that keep them out of prison in the future? I mean, what sort of barometer could we look at to really say, how could we tell if the system was working?
Good question. Yeah, I think that recidivism rate is a really good measure of whether the system is doing what it says it's doing, right? So the system is supposed to be, quote unquote, correcting people, right? It's called a correctional system and often a rehabilitative system. So if you have a system where people are simply cycling in and out, then that sort of reveals the lie in that logic. But also, I would definitely push further than that. I think that we need to look at all of the effects that prison has on both the people who are incarcerated and their communities. So we have to look at, are people being traumatized behind bars, both by the physical and sexual violence that happens during incarceration, very often perpetrated by guards, and also just the violence of being caged as a human being. There's lots and lots of research about the psychological and even physical effects that confinement has on a person and how that trauma is lasting. And also what kinds of effects that trauma has when that person is released to the wider society. We also have to look at how prison impacts communities. And this is something I focus on a lot in my book. When someone is abruptly severed from their family and community, often that person is the primary wage earner in a family. So what is that doing economically to families? What is it doing emotionally to families to have a mother or father abruptly removed from the home? How does it impact children? At this point, there are 2.7 million children who have a parent who's incarcerated, and there are 10 million children who've experienced parental incarceration in this country. So what kind of deep, lasting impacts is that having on kids? And I think just thinking about that idea of prison as a cycle, we should keep in mind, kids are impacted in ways that often actually drive them into the system eventually. Children are much more likely to be incarcerated if a parent has been incarcerated during their childhood.
There are those who would hear you talk about the recidivism rate, those who have more authoritarian tendencies, and they would say, well, the statistics that Maya's presenting are right, but wouldn't a high recidivism rate at least warrant exploring whether those individuals should be imprisoned even longer or forever? And while that's not something I believe, and intuitively we can sort of understand why that doesn't make sense, what empirical data can we look at to tell us that that is not the solution?
Yeah, I think first of all, we need to look at ourselves in context. So the United States employs, I guess, what I would call the living death penalty, life without parole, more than almost any other country in the world. And most countries don't even have life sentences in the way that we do. We give out life sentences in this way that doesn't acknowledge that effectively we're sentencing people to death. We also just have much longer sentences than most European countries because we have these mandatory minimums, right? For drugs, for guns, for all of these different crimes, we have these rules that we impose on judges saying, if a person is convicted of this crime, you need to impose this minimum sentence, very often resulting in these decades-long sentences for sometimes even nonviolent crimes. In fact, Obama recently granted clemency to a number of people convicted, mostly on crack conspiracy charges, who'd been imprisoned for over a decade, and many of them for several decades. And so I think looking at ourselves in context, first of all, and saying this is an unusual way to operate a system. And if we're having the kinds of recidivism rates that we have, given that we're sentencing people to such long terms, maybe we should start thinking about the idea that prison doesn't necessarily discourage crime. In fact, some would say it's criminogenic. It causes crime. And actually, an increasing number of social scientists are saying, yeah, there's something criminogenic about prison because people go to prison and they're put in a traumatic environment. If you've ever heard the expression, hurt people, you know, put in a violent environment where there are not, you know, positive motivators in their lives. And then they're taken out after years in this very abrupt way and put into a world that doesn't want them, right? Put into a world where they're not being supported, where it's very, very difficult for them to find jobs and housing and educational opportunities, especially if they've been incarcerated for many, many years. And in those kinds of economic circumstances, they're much more likely to turn back to activity that's been criminalized, acts that we consider crimes, just in order to survive. And so I think that logic that keeping people in longer somehow removes their motivation to commit acts that we call crimes is definitely flawed. And I also think in terms of the idea of doling out more life sentences, I think at this point, fortunately, almost no one is making that argument. And part of the reason for that is actually financial, that even a number of conservatives now are looking at the criminal punishment system and saying, wait a second, we are spending so much money keeping people behind bars. In some cases, we're spending anywhere from $30,000 to $90,000 per person in prison to incarcerate people. And so every additional year you keep someone in prison, you're just putting more money in that kind of bank account for punishment when it could be going toward all kinds of other services that might actually support people in being able to survive and thrive on the outside.
Maya, in the book, you talk about how our incarceration system has directly affected your family. In the limited time we have left, for people who have not yet read the book, could you give us a sense of that experience?
Absolutely. So for about a decade until last year, my sister was in and out of jail and prison here in Illinois, and she struggles with heroin addiction. And so all of the offenses for which she was incarcerated were related to that addiction. They were stealing and drug possession and those types of things, all feeding into that problem. And of course, prison did not address her health problem. It actually made it worse. When she got out of jail and prison each time, she was actually more likely to return to heroin. And so my family was caught in this cycle of, you know, spending a lot of time both trying to support her when she came out of prison and living with the reality of having an incarcerated family member while she was locked up, going on those visits to a prison 4 hours away and spending the whole day basically being treated like a prisoner yourself and having that experience of watching families who've gone through this for decades and decades, some of the other people in that waiting room, this had become their life. That waiting room had become the structure kind of dictating what their life looked like. And my sister struggled a lot in prison and is actually still working to recover not only from her addiction, but from the trauma she experienced behind bars. In fact, the last time she was locked up, she was pregnant, and she had to go through her pregnancy and then the birth of her child while incarcerated.
Wow.
And yeah, she gave birth to her child, and within 24 hours, her baby was taken away from her, and she was led back to prison alone and had to spend months there just suffering with health problems, waiting to be reunited with her child, and knowing that even when she came out, it was going to be difficult to be reunited, because that's a whole other system that punishes mothers coming out of prison with, the very, very difficult process of being able to reunite with their babies. So I think that what I learned watching my sister go through this horrendous experience was that all of the problems that prison kind of purports to solve, prison in this country is used to address poverty, homelessness, drug addiction, mental illness, illiteracy. It's not actually addressing those problems. And I didn't realize this going in. I actually thought prison might help solve my sister's drug addiction. But prison doesn't do that. In fact, it just erases those problems. It shoves them under the rug, right? And very often under the rug, they just fester, and often they're exacerbated. And what I really think we need is a society that prioritizes addressing those problems straightforwardly, as opposed to using this devastating and sometimes torturous system to hide them, to make them seem kind of less of a problem to the rest of society that doesn't see the insides of prisons. And meanwhile, those problems are continuing and expanding and staying with us while we spend these billions and billions of dollars.
I'll tell you once again, the book is Locked Down, Locked Out, Why Prison Doesn't Work and How We Can Do Better. We've been speaking with the book's author, Maya Schenwar. Thanks for sharing your story.
Thank you so much.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Let me tell you a little story about a 33-year-old former Little League coach named Jonathan Shawn Russell, who has been sentenced to jail time for spanking the bare bottoms of players who apparently deserved the spanking based on a Christian child-rearing book, according to the NYtimes. He pled guilty in North Carolina to 4 misdemeanor counts of assault on a child under 12 years of age. His sentence will be 60 days in jail and 18 months probation. The victims ranged from 8 to 9 years old at the time of the assaults. The arrest warrant claims that Russell pulled down the pants of the kids and their underwear and spanked them on the buttocks multiple times with his hands. He was reportedly influenced by a child-rearing advice book based in the Christian faith, Lewis, called Shepherding a Child's Heart. It's written by none other than Pastor Ted Tripp. Apparently, that is his real name. He read a passage from the book aloud during the trial on the witness stand, saying, "If you fail to spank, you don't take God seriously and don't love your child enough." So his bare-bottom spanking of 8 to 9-year-olds that he was coaching in a Little League were based on taking God seriously and also loving those kids enough. Apparently, one of the kids was spanked for saying, "Dang it, dang it." He testified he also spanks his own kids. So if nothing else, this is what? Consistency?
There's some consistency, but they are not his kids. They are not his children.
Yeah.
So why is he using the book, Dave? My guess is that he just wanted to put his hands on the butts of these kids.
You think that that's fun? You don't think that this is religious delusions. You think this is just a guy who likes touching kids finding a reason to do it that's based in religion.
I'm sure that there is some religious delusion as well.
Yeah.
But the primary motivating factor here was probably just butt touching.
As part of his probation, he will not be allowed to be alone with children under 18 or be involved in activities with children under 18. We did this story about Christian spanking of wives by their husbands back in 2013. Clip went viral, almost 1.2 million views on YouTube so far. And every time we talk about this, I try to get it straight because it really exposes how bogus many of the issues we are told are issues really are. Baseball coaches are spanking 8-year-olds in North Carolina after pulling down their pants and underwear, but we need laws about which bathrooms transgender people use. Does this make any sense to anybody?
Yeah, to many people, Dave. You can find them on the YouTube comments of this video clip.
I'm starting to wonder whether the Christian right is so obsessed with people's sexuality and bathroom usage, etc., because they are the ones who are so perverted that they assume, listen, everybody must be as bonkers as us and we need laws.
Yes. Well, repression tends to lead to this type of behavior, I think. And there's, of course, a very long history of all sorts of repression within the church, right?
As long as this dude uses the right public bathroom, I don't think we should be that worried about the nude buttock spanking of children.
I'd prefer it if he were using a bathroom in his solitary confinement jail cell.
Lewis, are women-only hours at a public pool to accommodate a particular religion a violation of church and state? That's the issue at a Brooklyn, New York City municipal pool, which has female-only hours so that Hasidic Jewish women can swim without any men being there. Critics are saying that you're accommodating a particular religious group, and that violates the Constitution's separation of church and state. Defenders, on the other hand, say, well, listen, women-only swim sessions are giving women whose community dictates that they need to swim separately a rare chance to exercise. What's your sense of this, just at first glance?
At first glance, I would say they should find a private pool that will that they can either pay to use or that will allow them to do what they need to do. If it's a public pool, the people who would be there normally should not have to sit out while they are there.
Well, we really have to think critically about this, right? I mean, one argument is that if you don't have these hours, you're depriving women of their ability to exercise, and we want to encourage women to exercise. The problem, though, is the rules that prevent them from swimming are arbitrary, from swimming with men, are totally arbitrary religious rules applying to their particular religion. But putting in place female-only swim to accommodate them deprives everybody else who isn't necessarily bound by that religion. But this is not quite so simple because many places have women-only swim. The Brooklyn pool's women-only hours are not unique. Seattle has pools that offer women-only swimming at numerous municipal pools. The city of Ann Arbor, Michigan's public indoor pool has a women's-only swim. There are a number of other pools that have this policy. And if this were done without the allegation that it's specifically accommodating to women of a particular religious faith, it's not clear that this would be a problem. Now, you could make a case that there's gender discrimination going on, and that would be a totally different thing. But as long as the pool isn't restricted to a particular religious group during that time, I don't know that a women's only swim hour is problematic. At least legally, it doesn't seem to be in many places around the country.
Yeah, well, if that's just what it's called, if it just so happens to be a place where Hasidic women can go because it's a women-only time,
right?
I still don't really like the idea of a women-only pool time in a public pool. I don't see why it's necessary. And I was also just thinking, what happens if there's a transgender woman in the pool with the Hasidic Jews?
Oh God!
let's just
God forbid.
Yeah, maybe we shouldn't get into that, but I'm just picturing that now. We can fuse a couple stories there. But yes, let's just, there are other ways to exercise, right?
Well, yes, but again, if you're going to say that this is a problem, you have to make the case that you can't have any women's only swim time at any pool. Now, for comparison's sake, it's also interesting to consider...
I'm just talking public pools.
Public, okay. It's interesting to consider which religion appears to be accommodated by the policy, because there's a New York Times article from earlier this year, which we're linking to, which called women's only swim time at a Toronto pool a model of inclusion, and it was meant to accommodate Muslim women. So if we're going to call one a model of inclusion, we can't really take seriously claims that when it's Jewish women being accommodated, it's a problem. But I think the broader issue is there are numerous women's only swim times all over the place. That is not controversial. If it is in your mind, that's what we should address, as opposed to whether it happens to accommodate a particular religion.
Yeah, I mean, I don't find it controversial, and it doesn't bother me. I just don't think it's necessary.
We have a voicemail number. The number is 219-2-DAVID-P. I will play a voicemail for you right now.
Hey, David and Lewis. This is Nick in Connecticut calling again. I was watching your episode from yesterday where you and Lewis talking about Trump University and Trump claiming all of this tremendous hostility imposed upon him by the judge. Are there any samples or examples cited about this alleged hostility?
There are not. I mean, it's all conjecture. It's all, even Paul Ryan now has said that it's racist conjecture. There are absolutely no examples whatsoever of Judge Curiel being even at all hostile to Donald Trump, specifically by virtue of being supposedly Mexican. I mean, Indiana-born guy. On the bonus show today, Lewis is going to tell us about what he's describing as the most insane scam telephone call of all time. He has been refusing to tell me about it because he wants to have my honest first reaction on the bonus show. We will talk about Turkey sinking a plane to boost tourism. And also, a rapist's dad says that 6 months is too long of a jail sentence for just 20 minutes of what he describes as action. Sign up for the bonus show and all membership options and features at davidpakman.com/membership. And of course, I have 13 of those half-price memberships available. If you want one of them, email me, david@davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.